Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and kick this off this morning. I want to say hello to everybody on behalf of Leader and Kevin, and I would like to welcome you to the first in a series of interviews that we plan on having where we discuss in an informal atmosphere how our customers are actually using our equipment. So we ask you to use the chat to put in your questions. We're going to try to handle as many of the questions as we can at the end of the seminar or the end of the Q&A today. And today I am pleased to welcome Dane Brehm, who is with us today. And Dane, welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate you inviting me. It's going to be great to be here today.
So for those of you that may not be familiar with Dane, Dane works as a DIT. It's a digital imaging technician who's apprenticed under a lot of very high-end people in the industry. And he's been in the industry from working from the 35 millimeter world all the way up through 8K and data acquisition. So he's seen a lot of changes in just a decade. So some of the things that Dane has worked on include King Richard, 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri, ripple effect, and he was on the live acquisition of the aquatic parts of Avatar 3. So from finishing through going through this, you can look up what Dean's accomplishments are on IMDb, and we strongly ask you to go ahead and look them up. But one of the latest things that Dean has worked on was he was on the second unit DIT as WandaVision here in the LA area where they were shooting the outside scenes of that and got a lot of really unique perspective after doing that shoot. So, Dean, in the simplest terms, what's a DIT?
That's a loaded question there. DIT, digital imaging technician, is how I tell folks who are not in the industry. It's like the CTO of camera department. I'm the right hand or a left hand of the cinematographer in the camera department with my first AC as well. And my job is half creative and half technical, and where kind of those two meet. And my job really, and the job of DITs is really just to share and maintain the look and feel and story, looked for the show, and just maintain that across the entire run of the project, and hopefully maintain and develop what you're looking for.
So Dane, Leader recently took part in a seminar hosted by UK publication Televisuals entitled Joining the Dots, the Importance of a Consistent Managed HDR Colour Pipeline. And on that seminar, Asa Scholl, colorist at Warner Brothers, Delane Lee, Tom Mitchell and Paco from Mission Digital, and James Bennett explored the best practices of colour management for HDR from prep through onset and grade. And probably the most significant takeaway from that seminar, which is still available to be viewed on the Leader YouTube channel, was monitoring in HDR on set. Now, you were fortunate that with the recent WandaVision production, you were monitoring on set in UHDTV HDR. So the question that probably everybody is desperate to ask, how did you do it?
Thanks, Kevin. I was very fortunate to have Jess Hall, ASC, BSc, as our cinematographer, as well as Marvel's probably chief DIT, Kyle Spicer. And so they did a lot of the upfront work when it came to developing the look for Jess and WandaVision, and what Jack Schaefer, our showrunner, as well as our director Matt Shackman, and what they intended. And what we had was quite a few different things. But I just kind of want to step back just a little bit, because there's so much that goes into HDR, and our audiences, are so lucky to be able to get to see it and as close of what we hope it would look like as we were filming it. And Jess Hall worked really hard in the DI to get that. But kind of going into how we got to HDR and what kind of that process is, I just kind of want to take you through, what that process is a cinematographer, in prior to HDR, when we shot just digitally or for theater, or we shot for television, those two things kind of produce two different color spaces, if you will. You had something that was intended to be watched in a completely dark black room, 100% immersive. And then you had something that was a television, which could be a little bit darker, but a little bit brighter. You could watch it during the day, at night. It's just people's homes. And so that kind of is what the foundation of the filmmaking process is. And in the recent, last year or so, we had more of a HDR Rec 2020 deliverable, which is Dolby Vision for some of the folks. And that's kind of the foundation of where everything is and where it's going. But I just want everyone to understand the preparation, and how an HDR show is kind of created. Maybe this isn't the exact way every single time, but it's really, it starts with prep. It starts with the cinematographer and the director having a vision and trying to execute that vision. And in the case of WandaVision, we had this kind of journey through time, or cinematic television history, if you will, starting with like Dick Van Dyke, and then moving along to Bewitched, and then we had the Brady Bunch as a reference, and then we had Malcolm in the Middle before we got to more of a modern MCU, and then kind of a futuristic, if you will, MCU look. So one of the things that the DP starts with is really the lenses. Of course, we were very lucky to use a very rare set of lenses called the Ultra Panatars, which are actually 1.3 times anamorphics, and those went onto our Arri Alexa cameras. And we were, of course, recording in Arri RAW, best quality possible, open gate, 4.5K. So the cinematographer shot some tests, and Jess really wanted to kind of develop the look as much as possible, and then went into Technicolor, who was our lab, and did the DI with us as well, and sat with them and sat with their color scientists and kind of broke it all down of what look that they wanted to have. In the end, they wanted to try a couple different things first. They didn't want to establish a particular look. They didn't just commit to 1,000 nits, which is very much a normal kind of way of filming. It's really just for those different tone mappings, so that you can see it at 300 nits, and then we could see it at 500, and then 600, and then 800, and then 1,000, to just kind of see where all of those highlights really land. But also in HDR, you have the shadows as well. You don't want to expose the negative so much, in fact, that you leave all this noise at the very bottom, because you've protected your highlights so much that you've kind of adjusted your exposure. It's kind of just taking the maximum amount of the dynamic range of, in this case, the Alexa, and just putting it right in the perfect spot where we're holding our highlights, but we're also holding our shadows, so the audience can see what's going on. And if we want to crush that down later or make anything, tweaks in the DI, we will. But for the most part, my job really is to kind of protect that exposure, protect that negative. So once Jess and Kyle kind of put together a couple, not more than a couple, quite a few looks for the show, they started kind of cutting out which different time period produced what LUTs. And so, the first LUTs are all done in black and white. So there's pre-HDR at that point. It's very much kind of your typical, 50s, 60s black and white television. Jess really likes film emulsion. And so he used a particular lens set as well as our film emulsion black and white LUT to mimic the black and white of the show. So we started there, but as we kind of grew throughout the course of the episodes, we moved into our HDR phase, which was, I want to say around episode 7 or 8 is really where if you have an HDR show, you should definitely, or HDR television, you should check it out. I believe it's episode 7 into episode 8 is where it begins. And then we started playing with that kind of a nit level. And ultimately, after looking at quite a few different looks and nit levels, which a nit is essentially a exposure indicator, exposure measuring on a scale of 0 to 1,000 nits or whatever. So we put kind of our middle grays at a really nice kind of 18 nit level or so, or actually our lows. And then everything else kind of scaled to that. But ultimately we felt that, 600 nit was probably the most cinematic level that Jess wanted to have for the show. He didn't really want the whites to blow out. He wanted them to kind of be a little bit there, but give us the ability to kind of take those down and work through them, test by test, both of day and night scenes, all of that stuff. But really the driving factor to all of this is, the script, reading over the script and understanding it. And as a, second unit DIT on the show, my job primarily is to use what main unit has shot already and reference that, because we could be doing the stunt part of it. Main unit could have shot our performance and our actors and then doing everything. And then next is, oh, we're, frame this, and then cut to maybe an action scene or maybe a different scene altogether, and second unit shot that separately. So a lot of what my job is as a second unit DIT is referencing everything, referencing our dailies, referencing the live grade stills, and just sitting there with the second unit cinematographer. In this case, it was Peter Lyons-Collister, ASC. And we just sat together and just looked at like how we can match all of that. Are we there? And, delivering this in HDR, really wanted him to shoot the show as much as possible for the scenes that we shot, using HDR as a new palette. So it's very, very interesting process, to say the least.
Great. So now you've done all the proprietary work and it's complete. What new equipment do you need on your cart that's different from if you were turning up for a 709 SDR production?
So prior to this, I pretty much my cart has seen many different evolutions over the last 18 years or so. But one of those was probably the first when we moved to OLEDs. That was a big jump. And then now OLEDs monitors are very industry standard. So in this case, I needed to actually add an HDR monitor to my cart. So HDR monitors are not very light, not very small. They're rather large. They tend to be 30 inches, 31 inches. But I needed my whole system to be 12G now. It had to be 12G in order to carry that 4K signal from the Alexa to my cart in 4K. And then it needed to be able to feed to my router, to my LUT boxes, to my live grade software, to my leader, and to my monitor, so that I could see everything that was going on. And it took me probably the better part of about a week and a half or so to develop this cart. And I was very fortunate to have Kyle Spicer, our main unit DIT, to kind of usher me through a lot of that. So Kyle was using actually the HX310, and I was using the Sony X300 because it was a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to manage on set. And we're out here in California, you know, it's really hot, and we wanted to make sure that, you know, we could just be nimble as much as possible for the show. So, you know, here with 4K, you know, having 12G is a really, really big deal. You know, in the case of live grading, you know, I did a full 12G SDI conversion. You know, I allowed the ability to, because I have to, our video assist folks who are watching it, our director is watching this, is not necessarily watching in 4K. They're watching in HD, which is, you know, the way that they work, and they have to be all over the place. So I needed to be able to look at both 4K and HD simultaneously coming off the camera, I'm sorry. So we had 3 cameras on my unit. Main unit had about the same, 3 or 4, depending on what it was for. And then I had my IS Mini 4K LUT boxes, my X300. I had a couple of Blackmagic routers, the clean switch, and of course my trusty 5350, which allows me to actually feed 2 cameras into it at once. So having, you know, having that all together, it's very different than in an SDR cart. And if I was to, if I was to put a price point on the additions that we had, ultimately was, for my cart was probably somewhere in the range of probably an extra $65,000 if you count the monitor, which is the lion's share of most of that. And so having those 4K routers, having that, you know, we also had 4K 12G cables as well. And both Kyle and I did use fiber. In addition to that, you know, Kyle had his cool little fiber box that he would connect all the cameras to. And then I, because I was second unit, I was more concerned that we might destroy cables. So in the end, we ended up just building our own 12G cables out of Belden. 4855R, I believe, is some of what we used. In addition to Canary, we had the Canary L5C and the L7C, which is just a thicker gauge for our big long runs, and we had to put DAs on the end just to be able to do it. So in the end, that cart ended up turning into Voltron, just to make an 80s reference. So in the end, just to be able to do all of this in a normal way. But once we were there, it was really exciting to watch 4K HDR live for the entire show, and really primary light to that. And then having our HD for our director, for our dailies pipeline, for our 709 folks who are going to be watching our dailies and watching the work that we've done for the day, because they're not able to see the HDR unless you came over to my cart and watched some of it. So it was quite exciting and very fun to, you know, convert my cart to 12G.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, Dane, you've mentioned and talked about what went on with the things you did there with WandaVision. How much of that do you think is practical going forward on most shoots that would go on, that would be, you know, HD, HDR, or UHD, really HDR?
Well, that's the thing about HDR is HDR can be 4K, can be HD. I mean, I guess if someone's got it out there, we could even do 720p HDR. It really has to do more so with the color depth. But the one thing that we do kind of take from HDR versus, and this is, you know, this is debatable depending on what production is using what. I mean, this is really how we did things on WandaVision, but also for a Lionsgate show called The Valet. Very similar workflow, but different budget levels. So HDR, you really have to come at it from a creative standpoint first. You have to understand, you know, the story and how it's going to benefit the story by having HDR, because maybe you don't want to have every single scene be like blowout HDR. You don't want to fatigue the audience the entire time. So this kind of setup that WandaVision and Marvel and, we'll say Disney for that matter, that will probably be continued for a while. I can imagine this workflow that Jess Hall has kind of ultimately put together really works for that type of filmmaking, visual effects intensive filmmaking. So I don't see that going away anytime soon. And Jess, who ultimately put this all together, will probably continue to use this for his shows, regardless of what studio we use, assuming that HDR is a part of that. So the HDR is here to stay for sure, but I don't want to discourage anyone. You don't have to do 4K to have that. It's just 4K made a lot of sense for us, for focus, for speed, makeup, hair, costume, all of those things benefit from HDR. Of course, talent and evaluating, exactly what the audience is going to see in UHD for the UHD, television owners out there. But HDR is very viable. But the one thing that I've been unable to get the best quality out of is cabling directly to the camera. Typically in production, we have wireless video and makes us very fast and makes us nimble, and everyone can do what they need to do and just take the feed from the camera. But in HDR, because we need the extra bit depth, not 8-bit, but we need 10-bit or larger, 10 or 12, depending on the camera you're using. We want to have, or 16-bit if you're using Sony, but having that color depth is a big part of that HDR pipeline. You need the full quality first. And so when HD can give you that sharpness level, but that HDR, I totally would suggest, if 4K is too much, for the production or the DIT, because they're having to provide some of that equipment, or the rental house, I definitely suggest going down the HDR route. It's going to make the producer, the UPM, the accountants, the overall group of filmmakers making the film more financially viable, and allow the DP to monitor on set, which I suggest heavily. I think it solves a lot of problems before they become problems. And if you look at the difference between my hourly versus post-production's hourly, it's a lot bigger of a gap. So I like to solve those problems for post before they get there, so that they're never problems. So I think HDR monitoring on set is really important, but it's not a must at all. I've done projects where the DP and I set up HDR, and the Valet is actually a great example. That's a Lionsgate film, hasn't come out yet. Is that the cinematographer said, you know what, I just want to have HDR for these few scenes on these days only. The rest of the time, I'm really happy to look at everything in SDR 709, and I want to foster that creative, process, and I want to make it easy. If the cinematographer wants that, then I'm going to give that to them. So making that easy for the cinematographer. I don't want people to get bogged down by the technology. I want it to be easy and reliable. I mean, reliable. And so that's why I have my leader on set. That's why I have that HDR monitor on set. And it's just a bonus to be able to have 4K, really, at the end of the day. But 4K monitors are there, they're going to be replacing OLED and on. So I think we'll see 4K emerging as more of a standard over the next 5 years or so.
It's interesting what you say there, because kind of in Europe, productions are now comfortable kind of with on-set monitoring of log images. Because I can remember turning on set when we got involved with the first kind of log productions, and everyone said, it's not 709, it's not sharp, it's not punchy, it looks washed out. Do these people know what they're doing? And you kind of say, look, trust us, because when that goes to post, that's going to look fantastic. Are we going to have similar challenges with HDR, kind of, that people are going to need to be educated on set about, hold on, I'm walking around the set here and I'm seeing 4 or 5 different looking pictures here. Who's right?
Ooh, the cinematographer's right. That's what I would answer to that is whatever the cinematographer feels is right is what's right. But at the end of the day, you know, as a DIT, which I've had the pleasure of experiencing some of the European companies and how they work. You worked with on the last leader. We had you guys had Mission, who's a very very well known DIT Dailies house. There's lots of them out there, but what really they work very different in Europe, and in Europe you maybe budgets are very different as well. You don't have the studios quite the same as you have here in California, or even New York for that matter, or Atlanta. So there's less of an influence, there's less of a hold, and so the cinematographers of Europe, you know, have been able to work in a very probably smaller, much easier, much simpler, probably more straight to the point than even some of the US style filmmakers. But ultimately, you know, it's, you just to address multiple monitors, one thing I start with, and this is back to that preparation again, is I'll do a lineup. I'll have 5 or 6, 7 monitors. All are going to represent the monitors we're going to use or not use, but in most cases, it might be, you know, here's our best monitor, you know, HX310, the most referenced. That's what the colorist is using in the color suite. That's what they're finishing the movie on. That's what they're doing their HDR pass. You want to be, that's your reference. And then the X300 is very similar. Like, they're so similar. The really difference is just some of the brightness levels and the menus, of course. But the X300 is the next one, you know, and then we'll look at, you know, some other HDR monitors. We have some other manufacturers out there, you know, that, you know, Canon has a great, Canon has a great HDR monitor. They're not definitely goofy. They have a very valid, very amazing monitor that I like as well. We'll look at that one, and then we'll look at, you know, SDR side of monitors. We'll look at Sony's, Flanders, Scientific, TV Logic, Small HD, whatever it may be. But once you line all that up and you say, I'm feeding the HDR to these monitors and I'm feeding SDR to these monitors, suddenly when you have them side by side, you can kind of see what the look's going to look like for your dailies versus maybe the finished film. I mean, not necessarily. Those colorists still have a lot of work to do to sweeten up, but really from an exposure and you know, image creation perspective, it's really nice to look at all of those. So if I see a monitor that's really green and off angle, and that's maybe our focus puller monitor, I might put a note on it. I might, you know, say, this is not HDR. Do not look at this in HDR, because there's an education process that happens for every single HDR production. And it's just part of the process, you know, is how do you understand what the film, what the language of the film might be. So I really try to promote, you know, understanding what you're going to be looking at on set, because in my case on WandaVision, I'm looking at 4K HDR and HD SDR so that I could understand what's going on. And I had 3 separate LUT boxes, which were just handling HDR, and 3 HD LUT boxes who were just handling, you know, SDR 709 for our dailies. And then we link them together so that if I would move, if I would adjust the SDR, in my case, it was adjusting the HDR. And that would adjust the SDR so that we could get close to the values of what's going on. But for, you know, the European folks out there, I mean, I applaud them, and I say that they need to get in there and look and try just like anyone else. And we're all kind of using the same tools. So I would say, you know, get there and find it out. But if you just can get an HDR monitor for like your testing, or maybe day 1, and then, you know, for a selective period of time for day 2, go for it. But HDR could be anything. It could be 300 nit, it could be 600 nit, it could be 1,000, 800, or anything sliced in between that. HDR is just, you know, Rec 2020 or the gamut. So I definitely want to say that, you know, go with what makes sense. But if you just need one thing, like one thing only, I would suggest the leader before everything else. If you're going to be lighting and doing everything in SDR, but you know you have an HDR finish, if you have that leader on set, then you can understand where your exposure is at, where your log, and protect for that, both the highlights and the shadows, so that when you do get to the DI, you don't say, well, I didn't see that. I didn't know that that was going to be there because I didn't have an HDR monitor. It's like, well, of course, that's very true. But if you have that leader, that really is going to allow you to see those unseen items that we use in filmmaking, you know, like blowing windows out, or you know, any, like trying to see a sunset, or, you know, there's so many things available to the filmmakers. And so it's really just understanding so you don't get into trouble later and create more costs, you know, and not ultimately define the project that you're trying to make. HDR is it's just another palette, another, you know, way to express the story that you're trying to tell. And I think it's the most exciting right now because we've been filmmaking a certain way for the last 30 years and 120 years at this point. And so it's really nice to have something, a way to expand that, expand what filmmaking is, expand what production will be. So filmmakers who are in film school right now can understand maybe where they want to specialize, or maybe they should understand HDR a little bit more than some of the other projects. So that's what I would recommend. Because, you know, your eyes can lie to you, is one thing I tell folks. And even the difference between looking at log in Rec 2020 versus log in 709 look completely different. You would look at log in Rec 2020, which is your HDR color gamut, and you'd swear it looks like kind of like 709. And then you look over at your SDR monitor and it's flat and gray, and you're like, that's what it should look like. At the end, they're both correct. So it's really just addressing the new look, the new feel, and really the new, I don't know, understanding of where things should be, what ASA should be, what's overexposed, what's not overexposed, what's underexposed versus exposed perfectly. And we definitely in filmmaking, you know, strive for perfection, but sometimes, you know, budget and time and you know, overall circumstances work against you, and you're not able to get that designated look. But you want to know that when you get to the DI, you got it and it's good, and you're not going to, you know, staring, excuse me, the colorist in the face going, oh crap, I didn't do that right, or wow, that's a really important scene with our lead actor or actress, or big storytelling point. So just you got to protect yourself ultimately. And you know, that's just one of the very things that I would suggest for people.
Yeah, thank you, Dane. So, looking at this, what's some of the more detailed things that you've used your leader for on set, and how do you use a waveform monitor on your cart?
Well, I mean, the first thing out the gate, what everyone buys a leader for is, you know, your waveform and your vector scope. Those are two big things. I mean, another thing that the leader does that's very unique is it handles all of the various SMPTE formats. So, you know, I can look at 4795 frames per second. I can look at 60 in 4K. I can look at all the different frame rates, and some of my other equipment can't even see it. We'll have trouble seeing it, and I have to adjust it to be able to, firmware update or whatever. So there's a lot of benefits to it, but that's kind of the first thing. And those are the things that I use like right out the gate. That's why I have a leader. But you know, some of the other things that I really do fold into my work is and sharing that and showing that with the cinematographer, because I want the cinematographer to understand what I'm doing. Not just arbitrarily say, open up, close down. Why? Because we're blown out there. It's like, no, there has to be a reason. So I like to, use the CineZone function, which is really powerful when in HDR. One thing that the leader does that's really nice, and this is a function that's been around forever, but is I love having the little USB stick. So if I need to pull a still really quickly, I mean, as fast as possible, and get it to main unit, or get it to another unit, because there might be 3 or 4 other units they're shooting as well, and they're referencing another part of the same scene that, the other units have shot or about to shoot, or whatever it may be, just as a communicative tool. It's nice to be able to pull that and just send it to them and say, this is where you should be at. And there's no discussion. There's just like, here you go. Like, this is what I'm sending you. So I really like having the CineZone, which is false color for some of you out there, and be able to isolate both just the highlights. Maybe I'll change my scales to reflect the camera I'm using, and the look that we're going for. So I'll kind of protect myself so I can really quickly look over at the leader if they didn't give us a lot of time to prepare, and I'm pushing my card in and I'm setting it all up, and then the first AD says, roll camera, and I'm not ready. I got to be able to look at that monitor, or excuse me, the leader, really quickly and see, are we good? Open up, close down. Okay, we're good. If there's an ND that's in there, then we do that too. But that gives me a frame of reference, especially for the log. But when you're working in 3 different color spaces on set on HDR shows, you have your log C gamut, which is your negative. You have your, Rec 709, which is what editorial in most cases is watching. And then you have Rec 2020, which is limited to P3, which is what you'd watch something in the theater in, typically in that gamut. So there's 3 gamuts you're dealing with, and the leader is really the only tool that I know of that can see all 3. And I can switch between, I can run my LUT through them, I can turn it off, turn it on, whatever it may be. So those are some of like the really immediate powerful functions that I use. But another one that I really think is extremely powerful, more so I would say for some of these live broadcast stuff, but can be used in a cinematic way, is matching the cameras, right? The way I do this right now is I have 2 inputs typically into the leader, and I can turn on the RGB vector, which is called the double diamond. It's kind of like the double diamond. Some of you might be aware of this from the broadcast days, but being able to throw a chip chart right in front of the camera, or anything. I mean, it really doesn't need, it could be a gray card, it could be anything, but really a chip chart, something to show you some, exposure, your whites and your blacks, is put that out there, and then you can use that to kind of line things up. So you have, A camera here, B camera there, and you can just say, okay, it's a little bit of a fast, quick way. It doesn't take a lot of effort. You can send, one of the camera assistants could have it on the slate. It could be any number of things. You can make it really fast, and it gives you that quick, that speed. Those are some of the functions that, I'm really drawn to. And being able to just, have something that if at the end of the day, I need nothing else, I just need to throw like an Anton Bauer or a V-Lock battery on the back of the leader and just run and plug in, or whatever it may be. I mean, there's a lot of power in that. And I think in our industry, you're against time every single day. You have to get it done in 10 hours or 12 hours. And sometimes you don't. It takes 16 or it takes 14 to get it done. So every second that you can allow the creative process to happen for the actors, for the director, cinematographer even, and all the folks in art department, that is a benefit for the whole production, and will just make your show or project even better. So I really do feel that, that little bit of time saves everything. It's almost like a race car across a lap. You're just trying to save every 10th that you can. And so having that leader kind of helps me save, that 10th before I'm like, we're ready, or, at least they're not waiting on me at that point. So that I'm okay with that. But if they are, and I got to get what I need to get done as quickly and as fast as possible, because it's my reputation. And, the tools that we use are our reputation. At the end of the day, if your tools are not reliable, then you're not reliable. And I think that's something that I really do take to the heart, and try to do the best. But hey, sometimes it's new technology and you just deal with what it is. But at the end of the day, it's good to have something that you already are trusted, you've already used, has a great reputation. And that's how I use my leader. And if I talk to any DIT about what I'm doing, they understand immediately. And so I think DPs as well, and first ACs, I know first ACs that have leaders as well. And it's still the best exposure tool, in the business. So I really do, try to use it. And I'll tell you this, it's so deep. There's so much there. I'm still learning how to use it. And so it's great to have those options to communicate, and just have it in your arsenal ultimately. And, one thing, as I mentioned before, is sometimes they're like, hey, Dane, you're going to the roof. We need you on the roof. And then I go to locations and they're like, the doorway is only this big and you got to go up like 6 flights of stairs. And the DP's like, I'm just putting a camera up here and we're shooting this, and they're going to be over here and you're going to be there, and just go there and expose that camera. Or hey, just go with, this little splinter unit. So I just need to grab my monitor and grab my leader and my irises if I have single channels, and I'll just run up there with my little kit and I'll plug it all in, and then boom, I'm ready to go. And that's the speed that I'm talking about, is having, sometimes you can't bring the whole big cart. You can't fit it upstairs. It's just too big. You just can't bring it. You just want to get the shot and get done, move on, or give the actors more time to prepare or get ready or whatever it may be. And so at the end of the day, that's if I was to reduce my job down to one piece of equipment, it would ultimately be my leader, with maybe the single channel or monitor obviously being really close by, even a LUT box too. So it's a much needed asset to any DIT's reputation.
Excellent. Steve.
Yes, sir.
Should we be brave? We've had some questions coming in during this.
Yes.
Dane, are you up for having a go at some of these then?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Go ahead, Kev.
So, a question here. Do I still need a waveform monitor on set, since I manage raw files instead of 422 SDI? I think a DIT needs a waveform. However, I was talking with some colleagues about it. They told me the most important dailies apps like Daylight, Colorfront have a powerful tool to manage the color, image, monitoring, and so on. Also, there's a lot of improvement with the daily software. Comment.
That's quite a loaded question. There's probably like 4 questions in that whole question, I would say. But just to answer, to kind of address each one of these, and excuse, hopefully I don't go on a tangent too much on this, but basically, yes, you at the end of the day, having RAW is very powerful. Having the ability to save a look or recover a look is really important. But at the end of the day, what the DIT, or what a waveform really does, is allows the cinematographer or the DIT to have a uniform look, a monitor that they can trust, something that's going to show them everything. It's going to show them lights flickering, maybe that LED panel in the deep back that, it's a little bit of a cheaper, unit. You're just trying to throw maybe a little bit of light into the background. To your eye, looks fine. To the camera, is probably so subtle that you can't even see it. But once it gets to the dailies and they pop on the software, yes, you can fix it if there's a problem, but it's going to cost money. So I feel that having a waveform, and a leader in particular, and a vector scope, because a waveform and a vector scope or even false color, all three of those are really powerful tools, and you want to use each one of those for what it does best, right? So maybe your waveform is just telling like, okay, I'm getting a little clipped. Oh, but my shadows are a little crushed. So crap, all my middle grays are really noisy because I've kind of shoved everything down for this look. Or maybe you're shooting a horror movie and everything's dark, right? So if you're living in this really low light area, like, oh, one of my cinematographers, Michael Burgess, did Annabelle, is I called him the Prince of Darkness, because basically our highlights were what people normally like rate skin on the Alexa camera. So that's like 3740 IRE. That was our highlights. So when you're really crushed into the bottom of the toe of the camera and you just don't want to have a noisy mess, the only thing that really is going to give you that power, that ability to kind of slice out, what's your highlights, what's your, their next, we'll call them, white grays. Sometimes that's a little misleading, but and then you middle gray, and then your dark grays, and then like your black. Like, we don't care about that. It's down, or we're hiding something. Having that leader or having that waveform allows you to say, this is where we're going to be at. And in the false color, and one of the things a leader does is it allows you like a limiter. You can set a limiter as well. So you could say, I don't ever want my blacks to go this deep. I want my blacks to go right here. This is what we're exposing for. Okay. And then I add my LUT on top, and that may crush that down so that it looks like black or rich black. And other cinematographers want really like, we got a ton of smoke, like add a ton of smoke in. Suddenly everything's gray and nothing has any contrast or any black, or white is like white and then gray. So you need to have that waveform to be able to say, you know what, this is good, smoke's good, right? Not just rely on the cinematographer, who might be relying on you to tell them when there's too much smoke or not enough, or whatever particulate you may have in the scene. Not every scene is optimal. So I really feel like the waveform and the vector scope are the two big powerful tools for a cinematographer and a DIT. Now, next, I want to address the tools that we're using, the dailies tools, and I want to make a separation between finishing tools and dailies tools. Okay, so finishing tools, our base lights, our Mysticas, our color front. I mean, not really. You don't finish on color front. You finish on like base light or something like that. Resolve finishes as well. Whatever finishing software it is what it is. And you're working with, at that point, whatever editorial gives you. Editorial says, here's the timeline, here's the EDL, drop it onto this. The colorist, the finishing colorist, is looking at the shots cut to each other. All right. See, shot, medium, close up, two shot, insert, cut, next scene. So the dailies colorists, yes, they have color front, which is extremely powerful tool for syncing, for creating a workflow, for CDL. I mean, we use it for VFX pulls. We use it as a database of all the shots. So if I need to pull something from the color front database, for example, because I'm on second unit and I got to match something that first unit did, or worst case, you're on additional photography, it's 12, 16 months later, here you are coming in for 2 days trying to get the look of the film and match that look. Boom, you're going to need to have a good daily software, as well as that leader and that vector scope on set for matching. And so that's why I kind of want to go back to, and you can match stuff, or you can say, you know what, this is new and we're going to replace something, or it's a whole new scene, a whole new look, and you just go from there. So it just depends on the situation that you're in. But I don't personally just blindly say it's raw, we're good. But sometimes I do. When we're in a really difficult situation and I can only control so much, or the lighting controls so much, or the DP can do so much, then we kind of lean on the Arri RAW or the Red RAW or Sony RAW to kind of get us out of that situation. Or, hey, I'll take it down a little bit more later. But in the end, you know, your negative is your negative. You can't come back. You can throw a different LUT on it. You can, the colorist, the finishing colorist can't really do much once it's there, but the job really of the DIT and ultimately the cinematographer as well is that you want that, just that last, you want 90% of the show to look the way you want it to look. And dailies is another step. The first step is acquisition and the look on set, and then carrying that to dailies and making sure that the dailies look correct. Because I watch those every day with the cinematographer, or I might watch stills, I might be video, it might be a variety of different things. So I know that when I have that conversation with the dailies colorist, or another DIT doing dailies, that there's an A to A situation here. It's not me saying, oh, you're doing something else. But you know, a lot of dailies houses use leaders as well. So it's nice to have that like the color, the DIT, the dailies, and the finishing colorist are all using leaders. We all are looking at the same thing, saying, this is what you need, or hey, I exposed it as this, and here's how I did it, or here's an example of my screen, whatever it may be. So that's I hope that answers your question. But at the end of the day, yeah, cost can be a factor. I understand that completely. But you know, there's what do you choose to spend your money on, and what can you convince production that you need? And sometimes you own it already and you just say, this is my equipment, this is my thing. But you know, I personally don't like to use the word kit. I feel like it's, you know, use the right equipment for the job, whatever it may be. It might be on the camera order, it might be on the DIT's order, whatever it may be. So it's just kind of like figuring out like what the best place is. And are you shooting it for 2 weeks and then the rest of the production's leaving for 8 months, and you're just starting the show and doing the first 2 episodes, and then the other 8 episodes are, you know, in Antarctica, you know. Yeah. So just depends, you know, on the production in general.
I'm now going to ask the next question. We've gone probably 55 minutes and we've not mentioned ACES. Question: is ACES workflow kind of mandatory for HDR shows?
Oh, the short answer is no. Just kind of going back to ColorFriend a little bit, and I want to say that when you say HDR, there's a lot of answers for HDR. HDR is like saying, you know, do you drive a Ford? Which Ford? You know, you driving a Ford Fiesta, or you driving, you know, a Ford F-150 Raptor? There's a big difference between all of those vehicles and all of the different types of HDR. So I first want to identify, you know, the gamut that you're delivering in, and or what your deliverable is, because it's kind of like start there and work your way forward. But you know, at the end of the day, the cinematographer goes to the color scientist, and the color scientists will sit with the DP and say, I want, you know, what do you want? And the DP will say, I want this look. And the color scientist will make that look. And then they'll give that, or we'll call it a LUT, just to make it simple, because that's what it is ultimately is. And there are also different types of LUTs, and ACES is coming out with a whole new version of LUTs with, you know, obviously IDT and ODT, just not to get too distracted about that. But to answer your question, no, you don't need ACES, but ACES can be still delivered in the back end side of things. And so on WandaVision, we used what's called faces, right? Fake ACES. And what that means is we're still using a CDL workflow. We're still producing an HDR and an SDR CDL at the end of the day. And it may be like a couple, it may be hundreds. It just depends on the shots and how that's used. And then what they do ultimately, once they get into post-production, especially, and I'm just going to talk about the color front system because I kind of know that the best, and please excuse me if I butcher this, color front. But what we do is we actually swap out the LMT as part of that process, and that allows it back into an ACES color space for an ACES deliverable. But on set, I've done a little bit of ACES like a few years ago. I've definitely, seen what's possible, but the cinematographers I've worked with have found it very limiting. But I'm also at the same time extremely excited by ACES 2.0, and I really feel like ACES 2.0 is going to be the ACES we've been waiting for, and it has, AMF files. We have tons of different carrier files that just kind of carry along with the footage or with the data or whatever it may be. But the last 5 HDR productions, I have not used ACES, but only two of those 5 have actually delivered, or at least delivered an ACES spec deliverable. Now, if it's going to Dolby Vision, in HDR's case, it may be ACES, it may be part of that, might go in an IMF. There's a lot of pepper to taste on that one. It just is like, which lab are you working with, which color scientist you're working with, what DP you're working with, and what finishing colorist are you working with, or are you working with multiple finishing colorists? Are you doing HDR pass, or using ACES? Like, just depends on where in the process is it being done ultimately. So
Brilliant.
that's my feeling on ACES. But I don't discourage anyone from using ACES or saying like, no, don't use it. I just think that ACES 1.2, which came out this last summer, was really the first time that I really was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. But I'm not a color scientist, I'll get completely ripped apart on ACES Central, which is the ACES Academy website, for just saying this. But, there's a lot of, we're working towards that. That's going to be ultimately where, the industry will go over the future, whatever that may be. But for right now, we're in that kind of limbo phase between using a CDL-based workflow, which is still very limiting, versus using an ACES workflow, which is almost the opposite. It's like you're limited in one way, but the sky's the limit to a certain extent. But HDR and ACES is yet to be, it still has some very specific things that need to be worked on, especially on the highlight side of things in HDR, at least to my experience overall. So I definitely suggest anyone go look at a project, shoot some tests, and look at it in CDL and look at it in ACES and see what makes the most sense for your project ultimately.
Great. So
just looking through, as I said, we've had loads of questions here. So what we will do is we will summarize all these, and Dane, if it's okay with you, we'll get the answers back to everybody. But what I'd like to do, one last question is, do you have any questions of us? Because we've been grilling you for the last hour.
Oh, for leader?
Yeah, you've got us here.
Okay. This is, please excuse me for asking this. Why are leaders so expensive?
I think it comes down to volume. It's a lower volume product. It's about a 2-year design cycle to build one of these boxes from just engineering. And so that's a team of engineers. So there is a fairly large investment that does need to be recouped over time. And I think that's what it comes down to, is we're not selling millions of these boxes, and they are built to order per customer.
One of the other things I've had, you've mentioned this, you're still finding new stuff on it every day.
Yeah.
So, there are a lot of things in there that people find very specific to their operational and production requirements. And you know, as the products have evolved and developed, they've stayed in there. There's tools like CineSearch where you can basically set a luminance level and then have a false color display to show you parameters either side. You know, people who use that swear by it, yet some people have never come across it and never used it.
Mhm.
So,
And you know, as you know, you found with the RGB vector, we are constantly adding new features and virtually all of them are customer driven. So we definitely listen to our customers and implement the tools that folks like yourselves really need to be able to do your job and do your job a little more efficiently.
Got another question for you. So on my older 50, we have the 5330, and there's even back to the 5150s and stuff, which are a long time ago. But in the 5330 and the 5333, those units had little quarter 20 on the top and bottom so that you could rig them and put them in kind of any space that you wanted to. But my 5350 doesn't. Are there any cages or accessories that you can get for your, Leader 5330 that is made specifically for that, not in a rack-mounted apparatus?
Not that I am aware of, but I will definitely bring that point
So
up
it's
with
an investment
Sherry.
opportunity for
Yeah.
anyone watching
Yeah.
this right now.
Yeah,
I think there is a company up in Seattle have done like a cage that it can hold on.
Upgrade Innovations, is that it?
I don't know. I'd have to dig back. I've certainly seen.
Yeah, I think they said
Somebody's
Upgrade Innovations. I just saw it come across.
yeah.
Yeah, one of the issues we had is that when we put that collar on the bottom, if you chewed the thread on that, it then sort of had to be returned to a service center because it's attached to the main body of the unit.
Yeah.
And as you know, when you're running around, you're quickly screwing stuff in, unscrewing it, and that suddenly it just goes. And the last thing you want is that, well, it's gonna have to be sent back to a service center because it's fixed to the outside of the chassis.
Yeah. It's like the board is like the board's there, so it could be like pulling down on the board or pulling down on the chassis.
It's been one of those that's, yeah, as you said, with people with 5300s, 5333s, it's not been an issue. But when we moved on to the 5300 and 5350, it went because of just people couldn't afford to be without them.
Oh, definitely. Another question I had is, do you think you'll ever have a version of the Leader? I've loved the 5350. Of course, I'm using 4K HDR, and I need that 12G connector that's in there. And of course, being able to accept a 4K, 12G signal and then outputting a 3G or 1.5G, signal out to my monitor is a huge benefit. Do you think that they'll make, I know Leader has a smaller kind of like, I don't know, what's the name of it? It's like a book size. It's like
a rasterizer, it's called.
Yeah, it's a rasterizer. Do you think they'll make something like that for that'll be like a 5350, that instead of me having this, box on my cart, which is, I have, its own space and its own dedicated area. Do you think you guys will come out with a book-sized version, something maybe that connects to my iPad or connects to my camera that I can load on something to, so I can literally just carry it around, so I don't have to here's my lunchbox. Do you think, does Leader have anything?
So we do have the 7300 that's the equivalent of the waveform monitor you've got. It just doesn't have a built-in display, but also it doesn't have like a DC power adapter with it, which is one of the things that people in your environment constantly tell us. I'm connected to AC power. Suddenly we need to go. I need to put an IDX or an Anton Bauer on the back of it. It doesn't have that. But then on the other side, it does have an HDMI output, which then means it could go into a consumer display and you could see your 4K wide color gamut HDR false color display on an HD SDR consumer display. So
just a lot of processing that actually has to go on to deliver all that, and the DSP in there is working its the FPGA in there is working its tail off. So that's one of the issues is getting, and that's one of the reasons why, like on a 5350, you got to take a full size camera battery really to run it because of the processing that is going on inside that box to be able to do all of the features that you've come to love.
Yeah, I mean, I love all the features. It's just, I didn't get to ask you guys any of these questions. And I know these are questions that are asked of me. The one thing, and, even one of the members or one of the attendees mentioned was, where is the leader in your chain? Where is the leader in your pipeline? Do you put it before the router or after the router? That kind of thing, but also just like being able to, understand, one thing I'll mention just, is, you can buy a 5333, which is really great for SDR. And if you have an HDR production, or maybe you just need to rent something from the rental house, and you're a DP and you just want to have something for like your little area, your little exposure monitor, and you're going to be on location or just want to be lean and mean, the 5333 does HDR very well, and it was actually the first thing that I used for HDR. It wasn't until I went to 4K HDR that I needed to have kind of a bigger tool. But what I really like personally is that, first of all, I want to say I bought my first leader in 2006. And then I bought my next one in 2000. I want to say when did the 5330 come out? Do you remember? You guys remember? 2011? Was it something like that?
Yeah.
I know I bought that. I'm still using that leader.
Yeah.
I'm still renting that leader. And a lot of people ask me like, oh, I've moved on to using something else. And please do for your show and your pipeline and whatever, your cart and what makes sense. But that's something that I still have and I still use. And so if you say, you know what, HDR is going to be 1% of my jobs, or maybe I'll work for a week on something that's HDR, is I still need that leader. And you can buy the leader as I did, as is, whatever the default, modes that are in there, and use it. And then when HDR comes around and you need that and you want to upgrade, one thing I want to ask Kevin and Steve about is, do you guys have project-based license for the HDR for the leaders?
Unfortunately not.
But it's something that you're working on that might be available in the future, right?
It's something that's not just applicable to kind of the production area you work in. We've had the same inquiries from like live production and that, where a big OB truck, only 1 in 5 jobs may be HDR or 4K, and they want that capability just to buy it for the weekend of the the golf, the motor racing, whatever, and then they go back to doing HD SDR type thing. So it's certainly something we're seeing a lot of inquiries about, and it's something that we've been feeding back to Japan now on a regular basis. But at this moment in time, unfortunately not.
Yeah, I ended up just getting it outright. I just felt like I needed to have all the capabilities, and because my leaders have been with me for almost 12, or not almost 12 years now. My newest one is not, of course, but for a product that's going to have a life cycle of greater than 5 years, greater than 10 years, is really rare in our industry. We're not even using 10-year-old cameras anymore, or monitors, or any of those things. So the fact that we're still using a leader and it still has a lot of viable options just shows, how powerful it is for the users, and why it's so reliable.
Yeah.
But one of the questions I actually wanted to, Kevin, is there anything else?
I was just going to add one piece, that even with the LV5333, although you can't buy it as a new unit anymore, if you've got one, or heaven's sake, say you pick one up, a previously enjoyed unit, and you want to upgrade, that license is still available.
Mm-hmm.
Contact Steve, or if in Europe, contact myself. All we need to know is the serial number of the unit, and then we can get you a price for that HDR license for that unit. So, you know, there you go. A product that's over 7-8 years old. Never really did, HDR wasn't even in anybody's mind when that was designed. Yeah, there we go.
Yep.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I think right now we'll start wrapping this up, and definitely let everybody know that we will get all your answers answered, and we will get all of it back to you. We're going to summarize all of the questions that have been asked on the show and get answers to everybody. We want to thank everybody for attending, and Dane, especially you, thank you very much for this. Very insightful. And Kevin, any last comments?
No, Dave, as ever, thank you once again. It's been fascinating. I think the term is you lighting upon magic, and obviously, you know, hopefully we'll speak to you again very soon.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
And there's so much more to talk about. We'll talk about pipeline and how all this is in the chain and the whole deal. So don't feel cheated, folks. Okay, there's still lots more.
We'll be back.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody. So if you have any questions or you require any more information, please do not hesitate to contact either Steve or myself on the numbers currently displayed on the screen. And if you'd like more information about Dane, his LinkedIn profile and IMDb profile are displayed on the screen. And if you're after more DIT-based information, then visit the DITWit YouTube channel.